To those of you who have joined possibly for the first one or the first two, welcome back. If this is your first time joining us for this series, well, then welcome to you. We're really glad that you made it. This is part of our three-part series with Rabbi Elliot Dorff on his new fantastic book, which you can purchase. There will be a link in the chat called Ethics at the Center. During this third part, we will be talking about speech, what to say, what not to say, and how to say it. Just a little bit about Rabbi Elliot Dorff before I hand it over to him, but he is the past president of the Academy for Judaic, Christian, and Islamic Studies, a prominent interfaith leader in the Jewish community, and is a distinguished professor in philosophy at American Jewish University. He was ordained by the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, and he even has a Ph.D. in philosophy from Columbia University. So if you need any more accolades to prove to you that you're in the right place with the right man to learn about ethics and Judaism and speech, then I don't know what else to give you. He's got it all. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Rabbi Elliot Dorff. And if you have questions, make sure you put them in the Q&A function, and we'll get to those as we go along in today's class. So thank you all for joining, and Rabbi Dorff, take it away.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for either coming for the first time or for coming back. If you're coming back, that's a real sign of trust, and I appreciate that. This is a series about this new book that I have, Ethics at the Center, Jewish Theory and Practice for Living a Moral Life. Just to review what's in it, the first section is zooming out, talking about the underlying beliefs about God and human beings in the Jewish tradition. What does it mean to believe in God? What does it mean not to believe in God? And what are Jewish understandings of God beyond the man in the mountain with the flowing white beard? How does Judaism understand human individuals and human communities? And how is that different from the American secular understanding and from Christian understandings? That was the first part. The second part is getting down to earth, converting thought and practice into practice. So I talked there about traditional Jewish means of inculcating morality, my own theory of Jewish law, applying Jewish law to new circumstances. How do you go about doing that when the tradition never even talked about certain things, let alone dealt with them, that we deal with in our own time? Applying Jewish theology to moral issues, Jewish prayer to moral issues, and the role of autonomy and community in deciding moral issues. And today, we're going to be talking about some parts of the third section of the book, which is called the New Deal, Personal and Societal Ethics. And in that section, I have one chapter on abortion after the overturning of Roe v. Wade, sexual orientation and human dignity, providing references when the truth may be harmful. We'll talk somewhat about that today, avoiding harmful communication and preserving modesty in communication. Those are the things we're going to talk about today. But there are also chapters on the ethics of playing violent and defamatory video games, a modern Jewish ethic of war, and we talked about that the first time, and addressing donations from ill-gotten gain. So those are the chapters in the book, and we're going to be talking today about the ethics of speech. So the first thing is that, as I said in the description of this section, quoting the book of Proverbs, that life or death are in the hands of the tongue. In other words, that the way we talk about things is really very consequential to our welfare, both negatively and positively. You may remember that in the Al-Khat sections of the confessional on Yom Kippur, there's a whole list of things that we as a community ask God's forgiveness for, and almost all of them are about the way we talk to others and about others. And so this is really a very important piece of how the Jewish tradition would have us think about how to live morally. Just to do a quick comparison to American law, first of all, has enshrined in the First Amendment of the Constitution is a guarantee of free speech. So as a result, the burden of proof is on the government to indicate why, or to show why it should restrict speech in any way. And so there are only a few restrictions on speech. Slander and libel are those. Slander is spoken and libel is written. And in each case, in order to be slander or libel, it must be false, derogatory, and harmful. So truth is a clear defense against any claim against slander or libel. So if you're telling the truth about somebody, even if it is derogatory and harmful, that's not slander or libel, and it is allowed. And so those are the two things that are the primary restrictions on free speech. Hate speech is a rather new one, which is and which lawyers are now trying to deal with. What constitutes hate speech, and to what extent is it's nevertheless, even if it is hate speech, allowed by the First Amendment. Some of you may be old enough to remember, as I do, that the Nazi Americans marched in Skokie, Illinois. This is 1968 or 69. And even though Skokie was a place where there were a lot of survivors of the Holocaust, so it was especially harmful to those people. And nevertheless, they had to allow the parade to go on as a matter of free speech. Another kind of speech that is not allowed is inciting a riot. This is Oliver Wendell Holmes. You may not shout fire in a crowded theater when there is not a fire. Or inciting a riot in other ways as well is also against the law. So those are the forms of speech that are restricted in American law. As we will see momentarily, Jewish law goes much further in limiting the kind of speech that we are allowed to say. And it also goes much further in talking about what kinds of speech should we say in order to be able to create a good society, actually a holy society, as I'll talk about when we get to that section of today's session. But I'm going to start with the negative so I can end with the positive. In addition to first of all, the Jewish law forbids lies. This goes already in the Torah, Midvar Sheker Tirchak, Exodus 21. You have to stay far away from a lie. To say something false deliberately that you know to be false is a lie. But what happens if you don't know and you say it? Well, that's not a lie, but it's still something that you should not do. As a matter of fact, one of the things the Talmud says is, in order to avoid lies, if you don't know you don't know the answer to something, you should say, I don't know. And one needs to, in order to be able to avoid lies, one needs to get in the habit of saying, I don't know, when you don't know. So that's important, for example, in giving references for schools or jobs. I often, because I teach rabbinical students, I often am asked, and I used to teach undergraduate students as well, I'm often asked to give a letter of recommendation for a school they're applying to, a school program they're applying to, or a job they're applying to. And I want to say exactly what I know about the person in terms of the strengths and weaknesses of that person for the school program they're applying to or the job they're applying to. But often I have to say, I don't know. So for rabbinical students, we're applying to congregations, for example. I can talk about the papers, what they've been like in class. I can talk about the papers they've written, the oral contributions they've made to our class discussion. I've gotten, because we have a small group of rabbinical students, I probably have gotten to know them personally, but I do not know what kind of sermons they would give, because I've never heard them give a sermon. I do not know what kind of organizational skills they have. I do not know in terms of how they handle a budget or anything like that. I don't know what kind of fundraising skills they have, which are all things that I'm sure congregations would be interested in. But I have to say that I don't know. That doesn't mean I don't want to convey anything negative. I just don't know. And you need to go to somebody else to find out how that person, what those person's skills are like, or the lack thereof, in regard to those areas that I don't know. So you need to not only make sure that you don't tell a lie where you know that it's false. You also have to make sure that you don't tell a lie where you're telling something, you're saying something that you don't know. And when you say I don't know, you are alerting the listener to the fact that they have to look elsewhere for knowledge of that particular aspect of the person, so that they can find out about it from people who do know them in those arenas. Another kind of prohibition of the Jewish tradition is what's called motzi shem ra. Literally, it means bringing out a bad name to somebody, sometimes called slander, defaming somebody's reputation. And along with that, another form of that is lashon hara, literally language of the bad. In other words, saying something negative about a person, even if it's true. You're not allowed to say it unless there is a practical reason why the listener needs to know it. So again, in the context of recommending somebody for a school or for a job, they may need to know some of the weaknesses of that person for that school or that job, as well as that person's strengths. Because if you don't tell them those weaknesses, then you are misleading them. Then that is what another form that is another form of speech that is prohibited in Jewish law. That's genevat da'at. You're stealing the person's mind, as it were. And you are another way that Jewish law talks about it is based upon Leviticus 19, which says you're not allowed to put a stumbling block before the blind. And the rabbis understand that to be not only a physical stumbling block before the blind, but also a stumbling block before those who are morally blind. So you're not allowed to tempt people with alcohol if they're alcoholics, or tempt people in other ways that you know are not good for them or good for others. But you are also you're required. You're also not allowed to put a stumbling block before those who are factually blind, that is, who don't know about somebody, and they need to know about that person in order to know whether that person is a good fit for a particular job or for a particular school program. So when the listener needs to know something about a person that's negative, then you have not only a right but a duty to say those things. You might also, if you're kind, might want to say, well, in this particular school or this job, this weakness can be met if you give the person these accommodations. And now, actually, in school settings, in American law, you have to talk about and schools have to provide the kinds of accommodations that students would need in order to be able to succeed. And especially with the Americans with Disabilities Act, that's true for jobs as well. If you're talking about outright disabilities that a person has, where jobs have to provide accommodations for those kinds of disabilities. So when you're giving a recommendation, you might talk about the person's weaknesses for a particular job or school, but you may also, and maybe should also, I would say, talk about what kinds of ways that person could succeed if given certain accommodations. Another kind of thing is what's called the vak lashon hara, the dust of negative speech. And that means something like this: this time he got it right. Now, at least in the simple meaning of the text is that he got it right. But you're saying this time he got it right, which means that in previous times he did not get it right. And that's avak lashon hara. It's called in Hebrew, the dust of negative speech. And you're not allowed to do that either. Because, again, unless the person who is hearing this has a practical need to know. But without a practical need to know, you're not allowed to say these negative things about people, even if they are true. Because the Jewish tradition comes out of a very strong sense that we are each created in the image of God, and therefore each one of us deserves respect. Again, that does not mean that we have to like everybody, and it certainly doesn't mean that we have to condone what everybody does. That's not the intention of the doctrine of being created in the image of God, but it does mean that we have to have ultimate respect for people and promote the respect for each other. And one of the ways in which we do that is that we do not say negative things about other people, even if they're true, when there's not a need for the listener to know about them. Another form of negative speech that the tradition does not allow is called ona'at varim, oppressive speech. The Torah in two places says, Lo tanu ish et achiv. You may not oppress one person. Again, one person may not oppress another. And because the rabbis have a rule of interpretation that the Torah, that God never said anything superfluous. So everything in the Torah must be understood to apply to something different. So one way in which the rabbis apply one of those verses is that you may not oppress people in business matters. And then most of the fourth chapter of the Tractate Bava Metzia in the Mishnah and in the Talmud talks about what it means to oppress somebody in business matters and how you're supposed to both avoid it and to make up for it if you do. But then the last Mishnah in that chapter takes the second instance of Lo tonu ish et achiv in the Torah and applies it to speech. And the Mishnah there says, just as there is oppression in business, so there is also oppression in speech. And what does it mean to oppress somebody in speech? So the examples it gives there are, among others, you may not remind a person of something bad that they did in the past if they have already taken steps to act otherwise now. If they've tried to make up for whatever they did wrong, and they have taken steps to act differently now. Notice how different that is from American law, where somebody who has been convicted of a felony has to note that on every job application they have ever from that point on, even after they've been released from prison. And in many states, if they've been convicted of a felony, they're not allowed to vote. And they're not even allowed, and they're also not allowed to apply for a government job. That varies from state to state. But in American law, the presumption is that if you've been convicted of a serious crime, you're not allowed to re-enter society in certain ways, even after you've paid your debt to society. Whereas in the Jewish tradition, once you have gone through the process of tshuva, the process of return, then people are not even allowed to mention it, let alone treat you as if you are still a person who does that, again, unless there is a practical need to know. So, for example, if you were convicted of, let's say, child abuse, and then you're now applying to be a youth worker in the synagogue, then you do need to reveal that to your potential employer, and your potential employer has a right to know that. But if you, let's say, were convicted of child abuse and you served a prison sentence for that, and now you finished that, and now you are applying for a job that has nothing to do with children, you're going to be the bookkeeper in somewhere or something in that order, then the employer really does not have a right to know about your past conviction in Jewish law, because that has nothing to do with the job that you're currently applying for. So that's one kind of oppressive speech that the Talmud talks about. Another is when you're talking about a Jew by choice, you're not allowed to ask them about their previous religious convictions. Now that was at a time in which being a Jew by choice was understood to be an idolater, which has very negative connotations in Jewish law. But now, first of all, there are many more Jews by choice, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Sandra Kaplan Community Beit Din. Rabbi Richard Levy, alav shalom, was the other, and that's a interdenominational forum for where rabbis of all kinds of denominations. We tried to get the Orthodox involved in this as well, but not unsuccessfully, agree on the on the protocol. That is what the Jew by choice has to learn about, and then also that everybody has to go through the rituals of conversion. In the case of a man, circumcision, or if he has been circumcised, hatafat brit, it's called taking a drop of blood from the penis as a symbolic form of circumcision, and then for both men and women, immersion in the mikveh. But the and we very much appreciate and value Jews by choice as we value Jews by birth. But at the time of the Mishnah, it was often the person who converted to Judaism was an idolater, and so it was considered to be a negative valuation of the person to talk about that person's past. And so the Mishnah says it is ona'at dvarim, it is oppressive speech to ask the person to recall that person's background, right? Similarly, you're not allowed to embarrass a person. And the Mishnah elsewhere in Bava Kama chapter 8 says that boshet, embarrassing a person in public, actually requires a financial remedy to the person. And the rabbis there talk about what is boshet. Is it embarrassment of a person if the person doesn't feel it as an embarrassment, even if everybody sees it as an embarrassment? So if you talk about a person, if you say that a person is well, I was very heavy when I was a little kid, fatty boom boom, right? Which was not pleasant to hear, frankly, when I was 6 years old and very heavy. And so that is an embarrassing thing, and the Mishnah would prohibit anybody from calling somebody that. But what if somebody says something which could be which the person involved doesn't see as being embarrassing, but other people would? Then according to the Mishnah, even if the person doesn't see it as being embarrassing, if most people would see it as being embarrassing, you're not allowed to say it. So the Jewish law is very extensive in the degree in which it prohibits any kind of language that might be embarrassing to somebody. And the Mishnah, I think, really says it quite well. The Tana taught, if those of you who have the book, I'm on page 123. The Tana taught anyone who humiliates another in public, it is as though he were spilling blood, that is, killing the person. Rav Malcolm Bar Yitzchak said to him, "You have spoken well, as we see that after the humiliated person blushes, the red leaves his face and pallor comes in his place, which is tantamount to spilling his blood." So there's in the same way that somebody who was murdered would lose the red pallor in his face, so too somebody who is embarrassed is also loses that pallor, that lifeblood, as it were, in his face. And so embarrassing person is akin to murder. That's going pretty far, but that's exactly how the rabbis understand it. And then one other negative form of speech, which I want to mention now, and then I'm going to take questions, and then we'll go to positive forms of speech, is bullying. And bullying is well, I'm actually going to mention two other forms of speech, of negative speech, and then we'll take the question. Bullying is especially problematic in our own time because it can be done on the internet. And when it used to be before the internet, whenever somebody was bullied, it was at that in that context, and as bad as it was only the people that were there at the time that heard it. But now it's on the internet and it goes viral within seconds, and it is really problematic. And there actually is a U.S. government website in regard to bullying, which defines 3 different kinds of bullying: verbal bullying, saying or writing mean things. Those of you are there in the book, and I'm on page 127, which may include teasing, name-calling, inappropriate sexual comments, taunting, and threatening to cause harm. That's verbal bullying. Then there's social bullying or relational bullying, hurting someone's reputation or relationships, which may include leaving someone out on purpose, telling other children, this is talking about children primarily, not to be friends with someone, or spreading rumors about someone or embarrassing someone in public. That's social bullying. And then there's physical bullying, hurting a person's body or possessions, which may include hitting, kicking, or pinching, spitting, tripping, or pushing, taking or breaking someone's things, and making mean or rude hand gestures. So here, the U.S. government has become very, very particular in regard to the kinds of harms that are involved in bullying. The website says approximately 20% of students between ages 12 and 18 experiencing bullying, and there are demonstrated connections between bullying and family violence, sexual harassments, and dating violence. So this is a major problem in our society. So it's not just teenagers. It also, by the way, applies to adults as well. So that kind of speech is, whether it's speech or social bullying or physical bullying, is very problematic. In the Jewish tradition, the physical bullying would come under Chovel b'Chavero. This is chapter 8 of Bava Kama, where one who injures one's fellow is responsible for 5 different remedies. The person has to pay for whatever injury has been done, has to pay for medical expenses, has to pay for time lost for work, has to pay for the embarrassment involved, and also has to pay for the pain involved, the physical pain involved in the physical harm that the person caused. These kinds of speech are prohibited in Jewish law. And then finally, the last one I'm going to talk about, there's another chapter on modest speech, swear words, among other things, right? A long time ago, when I was a freshman in college, actually, in the English class I had, we read a number of essays, and one of them talked about what swear words are like, and the thesis of the article was that swear words in different societies talk about what various societies feel uncomfortable about. So in Puritan America, swear words are about sex. In Germany, swear words are about bathroom functions. And actually, we had in the Ziegler School, we had 2 women who were rabbinical students of ours a couple of years ago, both of whom came from Germany. And I asked them whether that's true, whether in German swear words are primarily about bathroom functions. And they said yes, although they are also about sex. And in Italy, swear words are about the church. So the thesis of the article was that whenever you're talking of using swear words, it's often about whatever you or your culture feels very uncomfortable about. But after all, in the Jewish tradition, the sexual parts of our body are created by God just as much as any other part of our body. So when you are using sexual forms of swear words, you are actually dissing God, as it were, right? You're disrespecting God because you're disrespecting God for creating us as the sexual beings we are. When for 16 years I was professor in residence at Camp Vermont at Ojai, and I would talk to teenagers and adults about swear words, and I would say one of the real problems with them is that they are morally problematic because they're theologically problematic. They are, in fact, disrespecting parts of our body that were created by God. But they are also, if you use a lot of swear words, that's verbal inflation. And so if you were planning on using swear words to show how intensely you feel about something, that gets lost if you use swear words every other sentence. So if you really want to use swear words to show how intensely you feel about something, you have to use them sparingly. I'm not saying that you should use them even then, right? Because there are very good ways of describing how intensely you feel about something without using swear words. And nobody respects you more for using swear words. If anything, they will accept you for doing them if they like you for other reasons. But if you feel intensely about something, you should learn how to express that without using swear words, because they do sully the conversational setting, and they do insult God if you're talking about either sexual functions or bathroom functions, and they just coarsen the whole environment. So one of the things so the Jewish tradition has rules against befouling the verbal atmosphere by using swear words in that way. Okay, I'm going to stop here and ask if you have any questions about these negative forms of speech, and then we're going to move to positive forms of speech.
Awesome. So we definitely have a lot of great questions here. One of them has to do with your recognizing the different categories of negative speech. But there's a question here about how Judaism treats shame. So whether that's shaming someone, or perhaps it's in this context, she's reading the book Shonda by Letty Cotton Pogrebin. So perhaps it's revealing something that is, family shame. What does Judaism have to say about that?
Yes, and as a matter of fact, the Talmud is very explicit about that. This is, if you want to look it up, it's Bava Kama 86, 87. It's around there.
I'm looking it up right now.
Okay, where the rabbis ask, well, does the shame apply? Does the remedy for shame apply? The person who shames someone else, does that person have to pay the remedy only if the person shamed feels it, or if the family would feel it if once it's known, or if the community would recognize it as a shameful comment? And one of the things they talk about, what happens if you say something shameful to a person who's sleeping? So the person is sleeping, therefore has not heard the shameful comment. But let's say others are around when you said something shameful about the person sleeping, then does that constitute shame? And the answer is yes, right? If other people would understand it as being shameful, then you have to pay the remedy for saying something shameful to someone else. And similarly, if the community as the family would understand it as being shameful, or if the community as a whole would understand it as being shameful. And actually, I had a very interesting experience with this. For many years, I've been on the ethics committee at the what was used to be called the Jewish Homes for the Aged. Now I think it's just called the Jewish Homes. But in any case, we had a presentation from a gerontologist at UCLA who had done a lot of work in various kinds of nursing homes about how people were treated. And he assured us that at the Jewish home, it was not what I'm about to describe. But in a number of nursing homes, if you ask the people there, you tell them, first of all, that whatever they say is completely private. It's not going to be related to any of the staff at the nursing home, and completely anonymous. If you say to them, how are you being treated? And they say, fine, really good. And then you find out that they're not being toileted very often. So they're sitting in their diapers that are filled with excrement or urine, and they're not being walked very often. So that means that, that leads to bed sores and that kind of thing. You find that objectively, they're not being treated well at all. They're being treated shamefully. But they say, I'm fine, right? So that really flies in the face of American individualism, right? Where people are getting, personal autonomy is the sort of gold standard in American ethics. And here these people are saying they're fine, but they're not fine. They're being treated shamefully. So I said to the gerontologist, well, Jewish law would say they are being treated shamefully because the society as a whole recognized that as shameful treatment. So he and I were going to write an article about this for the Journal of Gerontology, but then he left UCLA and we never got a chance to see it. But there you have a very clear, practical example of where shame can be objectively recognized, even if the individual experiencing it does not recognize it.
Amazing. And by the way, you were right. It is, it is Bava Kama 86. I don't know if everyone can see this. Oh no, I think, but you were right. That is exactly where it is if people want to look it up. So
Okay.
fantastic. All right, next question. One sec. Okay. Oh, here we are. Under Jewish law, exceptions are often made. For example, Shabbat laws to save a life, etc. Similarly, under Jewish law, are exceptions permitted for a lie? Similarly, are there restrictions on speaking the truth?
Yes. And the answer is yes. Okay. Um, what Catholics call the white lie, right? In other words, a lie intended to preserve the feelings of someone. And guess who sells the first white lie in Jewish history? God. Okay, and it's actually in the part of the Torah that we're reading these days, this week, as a matter of fact, the where the angels come to Abraham and Sarah, first to Sarah, and say she's 90 years old, and they tell her that next year at this time you're going to be pregnant, right? And she says, "My husband's too old. This simply can't happen." Right? But then God goes and tells Abraham that they're going to have a child, and but God says, but Sarah said that Sarah, am too old to have a child, rather than insulting Abraham that he's too old to have a child, even though he's 100, according to the Torah there. So God tells the first lie in the name of saving somebody's feelings. Um, and you also get later in the Mishnah, how do you describe a bride on her wedding day? Beit Shammai says you describe her the way she is. So if she's beautiful, you say she's beautiful, and if she's ugly, you say she's ugly. Truth, no matter what. But the law is according to Beit Hillel, who says that a bride on her wedding day is beautiful no matter what she looks like. Right? So there again, first of all, you're talking about truth. You're not talking about truth and lies here. You're talking about aesthetic judgments. But even so, you're supposed to gild the lily, as it were, in describing a bride on her wedding day. So, yes, in the service of tact and the service of preserving people's feelings, you may tell a lie, as God did. And also, by the way, another lie in the Torah itself is, after Jacob dies, the Reuven and the other brothers come and tell Jacob come and tell Joseph that Jacob wanted him to forgive the brothers for what they had done to him earlier on in their lives, even though there's no record whatsoever of Jacob and expressing that desire. That after he died, that Joseph pardoned his brothers. But the Torah doesn't say that even though they lied about this, or at least they said things that Jacob never said. The Torah never says that what they did was wrong. So in the name of tact or in the name of peace, one might tell a lie, but you've got to be very careful about this. Because if you say in the name of peace, for example, that somebody is really not as bad as that person really is, the lie is going to, the truth is going to will out very carefully, very clearly, and the rabbis. So very often telling a lie in the name of tact or in the name of peace won't fulfill its function, won't fulfill its intended function. And in any case, here again, theologically, the rabbis say that the seal of God is truth, right? So you are again creating a theological problem, not just a moral one, in telling lies. But yes, there are these exceptions that the tradition recognizes, and there are also questions about what happens when should you just not say anything at all. So there's a dispute actually in Jewish law about whether you should tell somebody who's dying either that they are dying or that some close relative is dying. And the argument is, one side of it is that you should not, because you are then thereby dampening the desire and the actions of the person who is sick to try to get well, or at least to do whatever one can do to alleviate pain. If you tell somebody that you are dying, you might as well just give up. People might just give up. But others in the tradition, and this includes me, would say that if you're talking to somebody who's sick, you need to tell them the truth, because one of the things that if you tell them lies, then they're going to feel betrayed. Then even the people around them are telling them lies. And so whom can I trust at this time in my life when I am really vulnerable? So it seems to me that telling a lie to a person who is in really bad physical shape is doing that person a real disservice. You're adding insult to injury, actually, if you're telling a person a lie about their actual physical state. Um, Now, I mean, you can do it with a sense of realism in terms of what are the possibilities for alleviating pain, what possibilities are there for talking with people, with their relatives that they may need to ultimately come to terms with before they die, and things in that order. There are ways in which you can be helpful to somebody who is really in the process of active dying. But you shouldn't deny the reality of things. Okay,
Thank you, Rabbi Dorff. I have to say, as a soon-to-be future bride, I'm excited that we go by Hillel, so that's good to know.
that's indeed so.
All right, I think let's continue with the good speech,
Good.
shall we? And
Okay.
then we'll get to questions towards the end.
Good. Okay. So, in addition to talking about negative forms of speech, and the tradition is very explicit about those, it's also very explicit about positive forms of speech. So one is hakarat hatov, gratitude. And actually, in the book, in the first chapter and the last chapter, I talk about what I understand to be the primary ways in which Jewish tradition would try to help us be moral. And I think there are two ways that's the case. First, that we have to have epistemological humility, is what I call it. That is humility about what we can know. God may be omniscient, that is all-knowing, but no human being is. So when we should certainly try to learn whatever we can learn about science and medicine and everything else, right? We certainly should try to expand our knowledge about all kinds of things, literature, everything. But we need to understand that in the end, we are human beings that have limited knowledge. And so we need to have epistemological humility. That for me is one primary fundamental ground in the way in which I approach life in general, but Judaism in particular. And the other is gratitude. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, alav shalom, thought that wonder and awe were the primary ways in which Judaism understood life. I think wonder and awe are really important ways in which Judaism understands life, but I think gratitude is an even more important way and a more fundamental way. It's the first thing we're supposed to say when we get up in the morning. Modeh ani lefanecha, I thank you, God, for returning my soul to me, that is my consciousness to me. According to the Jewish tradition, we're supposed to say 100 blessings each day, blessing God 100 different times each day. And 3 times a day in the Amidah, in the weekday Amidah, and by the way, in Shabbat and the festivals as well, we say, Modim anachnu lach, we thank you, God, for our lives that are in your hands and for your miracles that are daily with us. Now that's miracle not in the sense of a violation of the laws of nature, but rather miracle in the exact opposite sense. Miracle in the sense that nature is so constructed that we are able to live and function. So we thank God 3 times a day in the Amidah for our lives that are in your hands and for your miracles that are daily with us. And we thank God for these blessings. When you bless somebody for something or you thank somebody for something, you're recognizing that you couldn't do it on your own. So you recognize that we are all interconnected and that we depend upon each other and we depend ultimately upon God. And so this is a matter of both gratitude and epistemological humility, and humility about our other powers, and not only our powers to know, but also our powers to do things, are ultimately limited. And that, I think, is really important because it gives us a sense of who we are. We're not the be-all and end-all of everything. We depend upon each other, and we need to be grateful when people do things for us. Even to the extent of, I mean, a long time ago, I'm old enough to remember when elevators were not he didn't push a button. There was a person who operated the elevator. And so I remember when my parents taught me that when you go into an elevator, you say three please, not just three. And please was to recognize the humanity of the person operating the elevator. I must say, when I press a button, I don't say please. Although if at the old University of Judaism site on Sunset Boulevard, it was the Hollywood Athletic Club and the University of Judaism bought it in 1955. I came in 1971, and that elevator was not reliable. So when I pressed the button, there was a piece of me that said, "Please, please, may I get to the floor I want to get to, and rather than being stuck in the elevator." But the gratitude, I think, is one form. Thank you and bless you for is one form of speech that is very much encouraged in the Jewish tradition. Another are compliments, complimenting people for doing the things that they've done well. And that's especially so when it's been hard for them to do that. Then I think it's important to reinforce a sense of accomplishment and a sense of honor in somebody when they've done something really nice. That can be, that can be a handshake, it can be a high five, it can be well done, it can be all kinds of other things, all kinds of other ways in which you express your appreciation for what somebody did well. And I think that's important because we are limited human beings and we do depend on, for our own sense of self-worth, on being complimented for the things that we do well. And aside from that, that encourages us to try to do them, to do well again. As a matter of fact, I've done a little bit of reading in criminology, and one of the things that that is very often true about criminals is that they have a very low sense of self-worth. And so part of rehabilitating them is to give them a sense of self-worth by giving them things that they can do and showing them ways in which they can operate in society in a good way. I've also been part of a restorative justice program in which this is for people who these are not for people who have committed violent crimes, but for people who have committed property crimes. Some, if the judge is willing to sign off on this, if it's the first time, and if the person is willing to go through this process, then they have to meet the person that they have stolen from, either carjacking or stolen from in some other way. So they have to recognize that it's not just an anonymous person that they've stolen from, that there's a person there. They have to work out a covenant with that person to what they're going to do to make up for what they've done, and how they're going to live differently. And they have to fulfill that covenant. So that it's there is a certain sense of restoring their sense of being part of a law-abiding society. So compliments and helping people help themselves is a really important thing. As a matter of fact, Maimonides says, has his ladder of charity, and the highest form of charity is to help somebody be able to earn a living on their own. So, because that is the best way in which you help somebody have a sense of self-worth. My mother was very active in Women's American Art, Organization for Rehabilitation and Training, which she very much valued because it would get people who did not have job skills and teach them those job skills so that they could first of all could support themselves and have a sense of self-worth in doing that. And I think that's very much along the lines of Maimonides' sense that the highest form of charity is giving people the skills to be able to support themselves. Another form of positive speech is what the rabbis call milchem shel Torah, the war of Torah. That is the war of studying Torah together. In traditional Jewish study, you don't study on your own. You study with a partner or one or more partners, and you argue it out together. What does the Talmud mean here? Or what does the Torah mean here? And how should we go about understanding what it means and what it means for our lives? So study, and especially study in groups, is a very, very honored form of positive speech in the Jewish tradition. Caring for the ill and visiting the ill is a very important part of speech, because when you visit somebody who is ill, first of all, most of us don't like to visit people who are ill, in part because especially if it's in a hospital setting, one reason is you might get sick yourself, so you're worried about that. And another reason is it reminds you of your own vulnerability. But another reason is that people don't know what to talk about when they're talking about the ill. And let me tell you that people who are ill, sick, and get sick and tired of talking about the food and the weather in about a minute. So what do you talk about? I learned this. I had finished rabbinical school and I was working my doctorate. And during that year, I was asked to give 3 lectures to residents of the Jewish Home for the Aged in Manhattan on Jewish theology. And the social workers who were planning this asked me to actually have some readings for these people, which they would put in, they blew up into big print so that people could do the reading ahead of time. And they met with me, these social workers met with me before I taught these lessons and taught me that later on in life, people's body language might change. So among other things, I remember there was this one man in the class who had been a dentist and he had his eyes closed for the entire session. And then he raised his hand and his question indicated that he had heard absolutely everything that had gone on during the class. So people having their eyes closed doesn't mean that they're asleep when you get older. But anyway, in this session with these social workers, I finally asked them why 3 sessions on Jewish theology. And one of the social workers said, well, it's because they're sick of bingo. Right now, some people, are when they in the dying process have mental problems. That's a whole other thing. But these people were mentally fine, but had physical problems, and they needed to be physically stimulated. So when you visit somebody who is ill, that you don't have to do Jewish theology, but the basic thing is you have to treat them as the adults they are. So whatever it is you would normally talk to them about if they were well, you should talk about if they are ill. So if you would normally talk about books or movies or show business or politics or sports or whatever, talk about those things. Because the subtext of what you're saying when you're talking about this thing to the person is that you are still an adult and I still value what you say. And that's the kind of thing you need to say when you're visiting somebody who is ill. If it's long-term illness, and most of us are going to die of chronic illnesses, not acute illnesses, it's not a car accident or a heart attack and you're gone. Most of us are going to have long-term illnesses before we die. Another thing you can do is help a person create what is called an ethical will. It was created during the Middle Ages, and originally it's called an ethical will because people would describe in a letter to their children the kinds of ethical values that they tried to live by in their lives. By all means, you may do that as well, but now you don't have to do it in writing. You can do it in whatever kind of recording mechanism you have. And it can include the ethics you tried to live by in your life, but also the family history. And I'm sorry that I didn't think to do this with my own parents, but I did it with my in-laws, where I took at that time a videotape recorder, and I just started asking my father-in-law, and then later I did it with my mother-in-law. What are your earliest memories? Who was around when you were a child? What was school like? Who were the other people in your family? He was married, how did you meet the person you married? And you just go chronologically from the very beginning. And you just ask questions. And I was really interested in those questions. And I did the same thing with my mother-in-law. I later showed the tape to my wife, and she said, he didn't tell the story the last time I heard it that way. Right? He didn't tell it that way. But that's okay, because the recording is not for public consumption. The recording is for the family. And let me tell you, not only the children, but the grandchildren are really interested in that kind of recording. And one of the things about illness is first of all isolating, and we are social human beings. So that hence the command to visit the sick, right? Then secondly, illness is debilitating. So when you walk into the room, sit down, right? Because you don't want, because if this is you, if this is the patient and this is you, the body language is saying, I'm okay and you're not. So you don't want to reinforce a sense of disability. And by the way, I say that to the doctors as well. When you go in and you visit somebody, sit down so that you're not reinforcing a sense of disability. Maimonides was himself a doctor, and he lived at a time before there were raised beds. So he actually says that people slept on mattresses or mats on the floor. He says you have to lie down when you visit the sick. You have to lie down on the floor so your head is not higher than the patient's head. Thankfully, we don't have to do that anymore, but sit down. Then illness is infantilizing, therefore talk about adult subjects. And then with chronic illnesses, illness is boring. So when you get up in the morning and, what are you going to do today? How much television can you watch? But if somebody is coming to help you create this living will, this living testament, this living description of your past, of your family history, that's a reason to get up in the morning, to be able to leave that kind of legacy to your children and grandchildren. Now, in addition to that, you should create an advance directive for healthcare, right? And you should create, obviously, a will for distribution of your property. But the same sort of thing, another kind of important speech is during a Shiva call. What do you say during a Shiva call? I remember somebody saying you should talk about baseball to get the mourners' minds off the deceased. That's exactly wrong, right? Because mourning means two things. It's separating physically from the deceased. We do that during the funeral and burial. But psychologically, it means going through all kinds of memories of the deceased. So that's part of the eulogy or eulogies at the funeral. But that's exactly what Shiva is supposed to be about. So when I go to a house of mourning, what I say is, what are your earliest memories of the deceased? Because Shiva is not only about the last parts of the person's life, which mourners tend to focus on, because that's when they lost the person, but what are the earliest memories of the deceased? And usually it's 45 minutes before I get to the second question, because I've indicated to the mourners that I'm willing to listen to all the stories. And then what you're doing then is helping the mourners remember the deceased and thereby go through what is psychologically required in the mourning process. So that's another form of very much validated and valued speech within the Jewish tradition. I'm going to stop here and take whatever questions you have.
Beautiful. So we only have time, unfortunately, for one question, but there's been a few kind of repeat or similar questions regarding your book and the contrast of Jewish ethics. Do you contrast between Jewish and like secular ethics, Jewish and Christian ethics, and even Jewish and Islamic ethics?
I do, in several places, I do make contrasts between Jewish ethics and American secular ethics, and between Jewish ethics and Christian ethics. I do those two comparisons because those are the two traditions outside of Judaism that Jews are most likely to know. I did not do it with Islamic ethics, and interestingly, had I done that, let me just tell you that Islamic ethics is not very far from Jewish ethics on a whole series of things. Islamic ethics is very communitarian in the same way that Judaism is. Islam has a number of different schools of legal thought in terms of applying Islamic law. It clearly is different in some ways. For example, one of my good friends is Musammel Siddiqui, who is the Imam in Orange County and the past president of the Islamic Society of North America. A lovely guy and really smart guy. He has a doctorate in comparative religion from Harvard. At one point, he asked me very excitedly, does Judaism forbid Jews from drinking alcohol? And I said, no, it doesn't actually. And he was very, very depressed because Islam provides all alcohol consumption, whereas we allow it and even use wine for kiddush and for weddings and things like that, right? In moderation, we certainly have rules against drunkenness, and we have rules against giving alcohol to people who are alcoholic, or even having it on the table. That's why a lot of synagogues now serve grape juice for kiddush on Shabbat, so as not to entice anybody to drink alcohol who should not drink it because they're alcoholic. So, I mean, but we do not prohibit it altogether. The Southern Baptists also prohibit it altogether, right? But I didn't use Islam as a kind of comparison because I thought that most of the readers of this book would not know a lot about Islam. But yes, there are many comparisons here to American law and to Christianity.
Fantastic. Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have. I'm so sorry for everyone who we didn't get to your questions. But thank you all for being with us for this third and final part of our series. Thank you, Rabbi Dorff, for enlightening us.
Pleasure.
We have received fantastic feedback, including, I just want to read this to you because I love this, from Yosef and Nancy Fink. They said, these 3 classes have been among the best I have attended in my more than 70 years of Jewish learning.
Oh my
If I were
goodness.
hosting a
Okay.
dinner with 3 guests, Rabbi Dorff would be invited and all would be enlightened, which I wholeheartedly agree with. And I just want to thank you all
Thank
again.
you. I appreciate it.
I just want to thank you all again for being here. Once again, we cannot make these happen without beautiful donors like yourselves. If you feel so inclined and you feel so generous as to donate to AJU Open to allow for more programs like this, please check out the link in the chat. And Rabbi Dorff, if you have any final words to send everyone off,
No.
please.
This is the book.
Buy the book. Yes, final word, buy the book. Awesome.
What can I say? My publisher would want me to do that.
I love it. Beautiful. Yes, everyone buy the book. If you feel so inclined to support AJU Open, please do, and have a beautiful rest of your day.